Welcome to Public Health Matters, where we talk about matters in public health. I'm Jane Goodman, Public Health Strategist with the Nashua Division of Public Health and Community Services. And today I'm joined by Rachel Maccini from the UNH Extension, and who is an entomologist. And I'm going to let you give your title. Welcome, Rachel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jane. Again, my name is Rachel Maccini. I am the Pesticide Safety Education Program Manager for Extension, Cooperative Extension.
So we brought you here today mainly to talk to us about ticks, because it's tick season, and I don't know if that's an official word, but but before we do, so tell me about some of your work at the UNH Extension and what that entails and how you know, what you've been doing these days, and have things changed since?
Sure. Well, I was hired 21 years ago, so I've had a long history with Extension, and I have an entomology background, so that's why I got involved in the tick arena. However, most of my time is spent either teaching pesticide applicators the proper way to apply pesticides to properties, and also to train them so they can pass the state exam to get certified in the state of New Hampshire. And I also work in an education center out of Hillsborough County's office, and we answer homeowner calls. It's a toll-free information line where we train volunteers to answer questions from gardening to what's this pest. So I'm busy doing that as well.
And were you able during the height of the pandemic, you're not in your offices now, as I understand from before the broadcast, we talked about that.
Yeah,
so.
we have been working remotely for the past year, and we just started this past Monday to now start to transition back into our offices. So the county knows that we are still here and we are still serving the citizens of New Hampshire.
Okay, so you've just come back.
Yes.
And so what was it like during the time of COVID, working remotely? I know you do a lot of field work.
It was challenging because we couldn't do those face-to-face, and if we did, we had protocols that we had to abide by, as well as our participants, you know, for any of our programs had to do the same. So, you know, we were limited to how many we could actually have in a room or outside. So that was challenging, but we did a lot of Zooming. So we've now moved our face-to-face programming to that online education. So it's been great because we've had a lot more interactions with people who couldn't come to our face-to-face because maybe they were working, or this allowed them to do training at night, for example. So I think we reached a lot more people, and a lot more people are now involved with our programming.
And then do they take the test through you, or?
They don't. They take the test through the Division of Pesticide Control up in Concord. Some of our private applicators, which are farmers, we can proctor those exams, but during COVID, the state was doing those testings. So
everyone had to adjust.
yes, we did.
So we stayed home a lot. So it is June, early June, and so, you know, people have been noticing, you see it in the newspaper, it's been on television, I keep hearing it on the radio. I said maybe it's because we're doing a segment on ticks that I keep hearing it everywhere. But I've also noticed in my own personal life, there are more ticks out there. So this is tick season, whether or not we call it that or not. So what are ticks? Can you help?
Yeah.
We brought you here to tell us everything you know.
I would love to. Ticks are arthropods. They're closely related to the mites and the spiders, so they're not considered insects. You know, a lot of people think they're an insect, but they're not. They're obligate feeders, and what that means is they need, at each stage of their development, except for the egg stage, they need to have a blood meal in order to get to that next stage. They're also very adaptable. You know, we're finding a lot more and a lot more habitats, let's just put it that way. And their bites can be irritating depending on, you know, who they're biting. And also they have a tendency, some of them, to transmit disease. And that's one of the main focuses right now. You know, people are concerned about Lyme's disease, for example. So they do have that capability of passing that pathogen on if you do get a tick on you and it's been on for a long period of time.
So we have a slide here, and we have quite a few, so thank you in advance for your beautiful slides. Although I have a hard time calling bugs beautiful as I speak to the entomologist. But it is really interesting. So your first slide shows the, if you want to just describe it, the difference here.
Yeah, I'm showing the difference here between a soft tick and a hard tick. Soft ticks are usually, they're nest parasites, so we find them a lot in bird nests and so forth. But they're not known to feed on us as much or often. And they're leathery in appearance, and if you look at them from above, you do not see any mouth parts. They're not visible. But on the hard tick side, they're definitely got that harder shell, and they also have, most definitely you can see their mouth parts. And this is the group that we're going to focus on today,
The hard ticks.
you and I, yes. There are approximately 15 different species of ticks in northern or New England. 2 of them are the ones that we're most interested in, and that's the deer tick, which is the Ixodes scapularis, and also the dog tick, which is the Dermacepta variabilis. Those are the 2 that are we're going to talk about, and those are considered those hard ticks. They got that hard outer shell. There's another tick I just wanted to point out. Has not been established here in New Hampshire, but we do have anecdotal reports through the Department of Public Health. It's called the Lone Star tick, and that's the Amblyomma americanum. And basically that one is, if you were to look at the adult, it has one single spot on it, and we'll go into that when I show you the next slide.
All right, and we could, so we could move to that, although I do kind of want to understand, why are there so many this year?
There's a lot.
Or are there, maybe there aren't?
There probably is not more. We're just, their season is becoming longer, okay? So ticks do not hibernate in the sense of hibernation. So they are active 12 months out of the year. So in January, if it's a very warm day and there's very little snow cover and you walk through an area of high grass, they could be still active at that point if we're, we have 50-degree weather or 40-degree weather and it's just very humid and they're active. So you could walk through that and get a tick on you. I think people are thinking we have more this year, and it's because we're encountering more. We're outside more. We've been cooped up for almost a year from our jobs.
Yes, we have.
And so a lot more people are getting outside, so they're seeing and they're paying attention. Again, a lot of it is in the news, so people are more aware of what they're seeing. So.
And is it also, I know that there are a lot of deer.
Yeah.
So they're carriers.
With ticks, let's talk about ticks need hosts. Okay, so when the adult tick lays her eggs, it's usually, depending on the species, it could be between 2,000 and 4,000 eggs that are being laid. That when those eggs hatch, they need a host to adhere to. So we have a lot more rodents than we have ever had before. You think about our human behavior, we're encroaching on their environment. We're building homes in areas that might have been wooded, and now we're putting a house in there. So this would have been a tick environment, and now we're in that environment. So we've got the rodents for that larvae to feed on. Then we've got, after that larvae is done feeding, it basically hibernates, or not hibernates, but it goes in and waits to its molt. Then it goes into that nymph stage, and then that nymph needs a host to adhere to. So it could be another rodent, it could be a deer at that point, it could be you. So they're looking for that last blood meal in order for it to get to that adult stage so it can start the process over. So, again, we're encroaching on their environment.
Right. And we clearly did many years ago when we built our house and took down a lot of trees to do so.
Yep.
We had a lot of deer walking through the backyard and that kind of thing. So
exactly.
They're coming back.
So there's a lot to feed on. So, they're able to produce or reproduce.
So you mentioned the second slide, which we'll bring up, which is the deer tick. You have the deer tick on there, the American dog tick, and then that Lone Star tick, which you mentioned.
Yes.
And that spot, it kind of does look like a star.
It does, exactly. And the idea here is I want people to be aware of what these arthropods, they're not insects, excuse that Freudian slip.
We don't know the difference.
Exactly. Like I said, they're more closely related to the spiders and the mites. So they have 8 legs, not 6.
Okay.
And that's what an insect would have those 6 legs. But I wanted people to get an idea of what they look like. These are adults. All the pictures shown here are all the adults. And so the deer tick, or the Ixodes scapularis, is that upper left-hand photo, and then next to that is the American dog tick, which we're seeing a lot now, and that's possibly what was on your dog. You were mentioning your dog had one on his coat.
Yes.
And dog ticks are usually on those sides of paths. You know, if you're walking on a rail trail, for example, you might see those dog ticks on the side of those the trails.
Yeah, I find anywhere that there's tall grass and we walk, we come home with some friends.
Yeah, exactly. So then
Go ahead.
telling them apart, this is going to be key. And I really want to point out that there are tools that you or our viewers can watch or use in order to tell these ticks apart. It's going to be harder in the younger stages, like in that larvae stage, because you think about the deer tick, for example, Ixodes scapularis. The larvae stage is the size of a pinpoint. It's very, very small, so you're not going to be able to see some of those characteristics. In the nymph stage, it's a little bit bigger. It's the size of a poppy seed, so it's a little bit bigger. You should be able to, with a hand lens, a good hand lens, like something like this, for example. This is a loop, a jewelry loop that I use, and I love it. This is a 10 power. And it's really good at looking at some of those smaller characteristics or getting really close to illuminate. If you don't have a loop, you can always get a magnifier. You know, this is a double, this is a 10x, and just a regular magnifier to bring those key characteristics up so you can look at them. And then we have these tick ID tools. These are great tools, and this actually will show you the actual size of those stages. So as you can see, Jane, they are very small. I'm
actually going to take a look at that. Yes, they are very small. Even with my bad eyes, I can see that they're small.
Yeah, so you're not going to always see all of those stages.
This one's been on my dog.
Okay. So it's important to zoom in on some of these characteristics. And so what I wanted to show on this slide here is there's two main parts of the tick that are used for characteristic or identification. We look at the scutum, which is that shield, that hard shell. And all these photos that you're looking at now on this slide are female. If these were male ticks, that scutum would cover the whole dorsal body. It would go all the way down to the tip of the abdomen. And in this case, these are all females because they're only 1/3 covered. So the Ixodes scapularis, the scutum itself, is always going to be a solid brown or black color. It has no modeling at all. The Dermacepta variabilis, or the American dog tick, will have yellow or white markings in that section. So it's kind of funny, but if you looked at the male of this species, it reminds me of an apple seed. You know, it's that brown with the white in it. So I always think of an apple seed, but it also can look like the Dermacepta aldopictus, which is the winter tick, which I didn't show here, but that also looks like the dog tick. So sometimes you got to zoom in on some of the characteristics to pinpoint the differences. So the festoons is going to be the second characteristics, and the festoons is that ridge right around the abdomen of the insect, or the tick. And it reminds me of, if you ever baked a pie, and you're doing that crust, and you take a fork and you imprint it. It almost looks like that, the pie crust. It's got those waves.
So you would really need a magnifying glass to see some of this.
On the adults, you could definitely see them, but on the immatures, you would need a magnifier.
Just to see those ridges. And that's like that black ring that we're seeing, that loop, almost like a horseshoe on the tick right now.
Exactly, yes.
Just so that our viewers can tell the difference as well.
So your Lyme disease tick or your Ixodes scapularis would not have those festoons. So if you have a tick that has no festoons on them, it's probably going to be your Lyme disease tick or your black-legged tick.
We have another slide that tells us about, you know, where are the ticks?
Yeah, this map basically depicts the tick-borne diseases because transmissions is influenced by multiple factors. For example, just because a tick is present doesn't mean the disease is present. Okay, keep that in mind. You know, not every tick is going to carry any of the diseases that we're concerned about. Only a certain percentage. But we have done testing in New Hampshire. The Department of Health and Human Services has done quite a bit. And I believe back in can't remember the statistics, 2018, that's it. They had done, the CDC actually posted that we had 927 positive Lyme disease cases in New Hampshire. Okay. Now there's another organization, it's called the Tick Report out of Pennsylvania, and they did 4,300 cases in Hillsborough County.
Oh.
But they claim that that is 10 times higher because not everybody reports that they may have it, or it's not been diagnosed. You know, people didn't go to the doctors and it wasn't diagnosed exactly. So it could be an understatement on how many cases we actually see. But this map here is just showing that the disease possibility, okay? And the important thing here is the Lyme disease tick, or the deer tick, doesn't do as well in the southern region of the United States because it needs high humidity, which we have here in New England. It doesn't matter whether it's low or high temperature, it's just that humidity factor is going to play a key role in that.
So it doesn't do well in Florida? I would think it would.
Not as well, because the environment might not be conducive for the temperatures get too hot. They may dry out. Their number one decimation to them will be drying out.
Okay.
Okay, so New England is one of the most populated for ticks, and it's because of our region, our environment. Our environment is perfect up here.
Right, right. You did just mention the cases, and this is just another slide about ticks and Lyme disease, which, you know, highlights that New Hampshire has made the list.
We made the list,
again,
exactly.
First in the nation. No, just.
Yep.
We definitely have a lot of ticks here, and you did mention, you know, why they like it here.
Yeah, you think about our state. It's a small state. 81% of our state is forested. So that is high. We're the second in the United States, just second to Maine. You know, Maine has more forested areas than we do, but we're 81% forest. So with forest comes our deer. You know, it's a great place for deer to be. We also have those pockets of humidity. You know, we think about, just an FYI, back in the early 1900s, in all of New England, we had about 300 deer. That was it. And not a century later, we have 4.9 million.
Do we really have that many?
We do, in New England,
Okay.
the New England area. But you think, okay, we're in New England. So, you know, as weather conditions change, the tick migration is moving north. Okay, so we're going to be seeing new species coming up here in our range of our deer tick and our dog tick, and all those are going to be moving northward as well, even in our own state, as you know, this picture here depicts. Oh, actually, we're not on that slide yet, but yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there. So, you know, while we're here, though, we talked about this deer tick, and the deer tick does cause Lyme disease.
Yes.
And it can. It's not always.
Correct.
So we just want to mention, like, symptoms of Lyme disease, like, you know, if you do have a tick bite, if you have noticed it, not necessarily going to get that bullseye that people talk about,
Right.
but you may have a rash around that area. So if you know that you've, you know, been bitten by a tick, whether or not you have that rash or that bullseye, you want to just be on the lookout for fever, headache, fatigue, any of those symptoms that just like kind of came out of nowhere. They didn't come out of nowhere, you had a tick bite.
Right, exactly.
Or if you've been outside a lot and you've been walking in the forest, you've been walking trails, you've exposed yourself more to it. So just kind of like we do with any kind of communicable disease.
Right.
And ticks are considered communicable because we become their host.
Exactly. Exactly.
So look at that, I'm learning already.
There you go.
So we don't want to leave that infection untreated. So that's
Right.
our public service announcement during this moment. And that infection can spread to your joints, your heart, and your nervous system. So we hear a lot about Lyme disease. And part of this is just to make people aware. It's very treatable, but you have to diagnose it.
Correct.
So.
And now that you know how to identify the tick that bit you, that is half the battle. So using the tools that we just went over and being able to identify that tick will help you in telling your doctor and having that discussion when you go in for treatment.
Yeah, whether it was big, if you could see the ridges.
Yeah, you're looking for those festoons.
I'm never going to look at ticks the same. But while we're on that topic, I want to ask you, and this, I guess this is from personal experience too, So when we take a tick off of our dog,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we clearly don't want to save it, even though you have some nice bugs in your jar.
Yep.
We are not saving ours. What's the best way to dispose of the tick?
You can just throw it away. You know, if
Because their shells are hard.
yep, but if you're removing it from its host before it's fully developed, you know, fully full, it's not going to develop into that next stage. They don't repeat feeds. They're obligate feeders in each stage. So they need, in that nymph stage, they need a food source. So they
Okay.
feed, they drop off, then they molt into that next stage, that nymph stage. That nymph stage feeds once, gets to its full point, it drops off, and then it molts into the adult.
Okay.
Then the adult feeds, lays the eggs, and then dies. So they're not feeding more than once.
So if I pull a tick off my dog, I don't need to crush it. I can just put it in the garbage.
If you feel safer crushing it, you could even flush it down the toilet for that matter,
Yeah.
or you can freeze it and then throw it away. So
Okay.
either way, you're going to be killing it.
We have some stories in our house. It's in a thing, it's in a plastic bag. I'm like, I don't think you need to do that.
Yeah.
So I thought this is for my own edification
Yep.
about what to do with that tick. But just getting back again, just to close the loop on treating Lyme disease, it is diagnosed based on your symptoms. So that sounds, you know, communicable. We've been in a pandemic. For a while, Lyme disease was, you know, really such a mystery. And there's a fascinating podcast actually produced by our own public radio station about the origins of Lyme disease in Lyme, Connecticut, not too far away.
Yeah.
But it is based on symptoms, physical findings, and the possibility of exposure to those ticks. So if you know you've been hiking and doing things outside, gardening and all of those great things to do outside, especially during a pandemic, just be aware.
Yep.
And most of these are treated very successfully with a course of antibiotics. So that's all we have on that, but we will circle back to Lyme disease, of course. So we are now, we have a new slide about the deer tick distribution in New Hampshire.
Right, and how it's expanding.
Yeah.
And the thing I wanted to point out with this map is this is the Lyme disease cases, and it's showing the movement up into our northern region of the state. But what I wanted to clarify here is we do not have right now, my predecessor, Dr. Alan Eaton, did a lot of work on surveillance. He actually did tick counts throughout the state in different locations. And he was instrumental on knowing, okay, which ticks were found where. And unfortunately, with his retirement, the work stopped in 2014. So I know the Department of Health and Human Services working on developing a new surveillance program where they're going to go out there and monitor for the tick expansion. But I wanted to point out this map here is showing the disease presence. But you can also say, okay, well, if we're seeing Lyme disease in Coos County, you know, small numbers, it could be, yeah, people are going to the southern regions of the state and maybe returning home.
Right.
Or it can show some of these darker areas are showing there probably is a tick presence there. So therefore, we're seeing that migration of that tick, the Lyme disease tick, moving northward in our state.
And do you think because it's getting warmer, or?
We are
the global
getting
warming?
warmer, and there has been studies done that are showing that our season is actually 7.1 days warmer than it has been in years past. So that's telling you right there, okay, we are warming up, so therefore, you know, the season's longer. So that could be playing a role in this as well.
Yeah, and it's definitely warming up around here
Yes.
earlier. I can attest, we can all attest to that.
Yeah.
By the forecast ahead for us.
I think Sunday was going to be 95 degrees.
Yeah,
It's like,
so-
oh, wow.
yeah, so that is not very encouraging. So what else did you want to tell me about this?
On this slide, I'm also showing myself. I'm doing
Yes.
what we call a tick drag. There's two tools you can use. You can do a tick drag or you can do a flagging. And what this can tell you is if you create one of these tick drags, and I brought one here, basically all this is a piece of felt material with a PVC pipe and a rope through it. And you definitely want to make sure that you are protected if you're going to be doing this, because you will get if there are ticks present, you're going to get ticks on you as well. And you just, areas of your property maybe, or areas that you want to maybe go to, you can do a tick drag to see if ticks are present. But keep in mind, one tick drag isn't going to give a positive outcome.
Okay.
You've got to do this more than once, because you could just hit it at a bad day. You know, we might have just had a rain, so the ticks aren't going to be present at that point.
Okay.
So just keep in mind that ticks are there, even though you may not find them, because they're not going to move on or be somewhere else. Okay,
Yeah.
they will probably be in this area, but just the day you do your drag, it might
So
not.
you have to do
be
a couple
conclusive.
times.
You want to do it 2 to 3 times, exactly. And what I do with summer camps, for example, day camps, I'll go out and I'll do a tick sweep on the property to give them an idea of, okay, if I find ticks in this spot, this could possibly be a hot spot, so you may want to tag it and just keep the campers away from that area during the camp season. And that seems to help.
That's interesting.
You know? Yep.
So it can also, like, you know, it can give you an idea of like how many are there. Like you said, that would be a hot spot.
Possibly,
You know, or-
but again, keep in mind that because ticks feed on rodents and mammals that are migratory, they move, they could drop off. And they could, like we were talking earlier about having ticks on your lawn. They're not normally on a manicured lawn. But if you had maybe a rabbit or a bird and it was on that animal and it fell off, then you might pick it up on your, you know, in your lawn. But not normally. It's usually in the, again, those high humidity areas. But dog ticks, on the other hand, don't care for a higher humidity. They can survive in lower humidity. So it really depends on the species of tick and where you're finding them. So.
Wow. It's a lot to take in, Rachel, I have to admit.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
Yeah.
okay. It's excellent. It's excellent information. I'm going to like really educate my family tonight. So we have this next slide.
This is an important one. This is really telling you and showing you the life cycle of the black-legged or the Lyme disease tick, the deer tick. So again, the adult female has to have that blood meal in order for her to lay those eggs. And she'll lay between 2,000 to maybe 3,000 eggs, depending. And then this is usually done in the spring. And then it takes 2 years for their life cycle to be complete. So she's going to lay her eggs in the spring. Those eggs are going to hatch. Those larvae, which are 6-legged, are going to attach themselves to a small rodent. Might be a field mouse, could be a squirrel, could be a chipmunk, whatever's in the area. That's going to be stage number 1. They're going to feed on that small rodent. Could be a bird as well.
I think it's going to be a chipmunk.
Okay, and we've got a lot of chipmunks. You know, I think about all these.
That could be my next guess. Why are there so many chipmunks?
We're feeding the birds, right? So we're feeding them as well. So you think about our habits and what we're doing
Right.
for wildlife. You know, sometimes we're to blame, unfortunately, but yeah. And we have beautiful, again, a beautiful state in those forested areas, a lot of rock walls, a lot of habitat
Little
for them.
places to hide, yeah.
And because we're expanding, building more homes, there's less predators. You know, think about the birds that, the raptor birds that used to feed on them, and they had all this open space, and we're all forests now. So they're having a hard time getting those because all our fields are gone. So we think about that. So then that larvae will feed, and then the nymphs will come later. So this is the stage that we are the most concerned about, because the nymphs are so small. They're the ones that are primarily the vectors for Lyme disease, because we miss them. So it's very important that if you're in any of these areas that you think are tick habitats, that you do tick checks when you come home, because this is the stage that we don't see. Okay, we see the adults. You know, a lot of people will see the adults, and because they're bigger. You know, these nymphs are about the size of a poppy seed. That's pretty small.
So will it grow though? Will it become a bigger poppy seed so that I can see it?
As it will, but
Okay.
no, that's why it's important. You know, you do your tick checks, and there's a whole routine that you can go through in order to do that. If you know you've been outside, you can launder your clothes, you can put them in dryers and stuff like that, but you want to shower within 2 hours of being outside. And there's been a lot of studies done Believe it or not, the Department of Connecticut Experiment Station, Dr. Kirby Stafford, has done a lot of work on where people are picking up ticks. They've done surveys and so forth, and most of the ticks that people are finding are from their own backyard. Doing things we love to do, gardening, just playing, just being outside. So, you know, just because your yard is here doesn't mean there aren't ticks on it. So again, that's why I was talking about, you know, you don't have to do a sweep, but you just want to be cognizant and be able to understand what they need and where they're, you know, they're living, you know. And so there are things we can do, and we'll talk about that. But again, the nymphs and the adults are the two that you want to be on the lookout for. And that's usually the spring through the summer months.
So will this slow down? So we're, you know, we're early in this. We're not even technically in summer yet. We're still really in spring.
So we're looking at, for the nymphs, we're looking at probably August, that time frame. And then we're going to hit the adults right after that. So, you know, you've got the rest of the year.
It's cheerful.
That you could be finding ticks, exactly. So April through August are really those the key times here.
So that kind of brings us to the next thing, because you did prepare a slide about the seasonality of it, so we can see that on.
Dog ticks only take 54 days in order for them to go through their life cycle. So it could be up to 2 years depending on food supply. So again, the dog ticks, you're going to see seasonality. The nymphs and the adults usually are out together, and that's now. And you were talking about your dog, and usually those are in the areas that are less forested. So they're going to be along walkways that are exposed to the sun, because they don't require that higher humidity that the Lyme disease tick does. So, and we're seeing a lot of them. You know, I did a tick sweep on a dog path, the rail trail, actually up in Manchester, and I got 37 of them. And they were varying stages, the adults and the nymphs, both males and females. So they're there.
They're there.
Yep.
They're out and about.
So,
all right. So then I think we touched a little bit on this, but it is worth repeating. So, where do they like to live? And
yep,
you have
the habitat for the black-legged tick most definitely are going to be those deciduous forests. And you think about why deciduous forests, because there's a lot of, again, understory. You know, a lot of our pine tree forests, there's not a lot of understory, so the humidity levels aren't going to be as high as a deciduous forest, which has got a lot of that understory. And they are doing also studies on the fact that some of our invasive species that are in those forest settings are prime tick habitat. So you think about barberry, for example. It's got all those thorns, and rodents can get in there, and they're protected. So they're going to live through that life cycle. They're feeding on the rodents, you know, are the food source, and then boom, they can lay their eggs, and we start our next generation. So they're finding a lot of that, you know, with tick sweeps and counts. So
I'm thinking I live in the perfect breeding ground for ticks.
Exactly. Yep. So I just keep my lawn mowed.
Yeah. I mean, we have the mowed lawn, but then we have like the trees behind it because it is forested.
Yep.
You know, we didn't take down all the trees, so you know, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, you know, we're sunk.
Yeah. Don't look at it that way. Just, you know, you're learning some tools today that will help you.
Right.
Yep. So again, the unfavorable locations for Lyme disease tick would be those open, dry areas. So
like the lawn.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, don't be misled. Ticks can be on your lawn if they're falling off of animals that have frequented your area. So we're also finding like ground covers. That's another really good location for ticks to be, because again, it's that humidity level. So if we could, like, some of the recommendations I make to people is, you know, make your yard a little less humid by pruning things and allowing more sunlight in to dry things out. That will help. And we'll go into this slides later, but yeah, things like that. You know, you want to just get rid of that humidity level. So then the dog tick, we've already touched on this. This is our next slide here, but it's the shrub layer, and it's usually along medium height grasses. And ticks, I want to mention this, ticks do not jump, fly, or drop out of trees more or less, they crawl. Usually they're attaching to you below the knee and crawling upwards. That's the normal behavior of a tick. And the hard ticks have this really cool behavior. It's called questing. So what they do is, as you know, they have 8 legs. They crawl up on the edges of grasses or shrubs, and they hang out there. And they're going to sense CO2, warmth, and movement. So they're actually feeling the vibration. And so with 6 of their legs, they're holding on to whatever they're on, their plant, and their 4th pair, they wave it in the air. And they just wait for something to come by and they latch on.
Wow.
It's amazing.
So you shouldn't stand in one place for too long.
Exactly. So
lessons learned. I'll be like, I was planning to be outside all weekend, but maybe I'll change my mind.
You will, though. Yeah, we'll give you some tips on what you can do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to need some. That's the next slide, like control strategies. So
Yeah.
what should we do?
And there are many. And I always like to stress the integrated approach, because a lot of people, they just want to spray. They want to spray their yards. They want to. You want to tackle this in many different ways. And right now, what we're doing today, education is number one. The more we can educate people on what to do and how to handle a tick situation, the better off they're going to be. Secondly is personal protective equipment. This is going to be the number one protection. So what that means is...
So we will never be done with PPE?
Probably not, ever. Until they're eliminated, which will never happen. Because again, think about ticks are in their own right a food source for other animals. So who are we to say that they don't belong here? They're part of our ecosystem. They're part of our natural environment. So landscape modifications would be another one, and then controls. And you can tackle controls in many different ways. We can use synthetic pesticides. We could look at botanicals and natural products. And there are pros and cons of all of them. And that's something that you or the viewer will have to, decide for on their own. But let's look at some of these. So the landscape changes. This next slide, I just want to point out that this photo here was taken from the Guide to Tick Management that was written by Dr. Kirby Stanford from UConn University, Connecticut Experiment Station. And basically what this is showing is what are some of the changes you can make on your own property to minimize tick habitat or exposure to ticks, okay? You're not going to get rid of all of them. Even if you sprayed your yard everywhere, you're not going to get rid of them because your spray is only as good as where you're putting it and how it's being applied. So we look at this picture and we notice up in the right hand or the right hand side, we've put a barrier. It could be wood chips, it could be stone. You want about a 3-foot barrier. And that's because that interface, again, that interface between your lawn and that wooded area is going to be prime tick habitat. Okay, and also your animals. Your dog will run into that area, so if you put this barrier, maybe they'll stay on this side. A lot of people also, the swing sets. Where do you usually find a swing set? Under that shaded tree.
Yeah.
And I know it's horrible to say, well, I don't want to put my swing set out in the open sun because then the kids will get sunburn, or maybe you could put a tarp or like awnings over that swing set to keep the sun off of them, but you don't want them right on your property border. Again, because that's tick habitat. We love to feed birds, and I stress this to people. I love to feed birds, I love to see birds, but you don't want your bird feeder on top of your property. Put it further away on areas where you're not going to be frequenting, and you can still see it from a window if you strategically place it, because if they're closer to your home, then you're going to get the rodents that come in to feed on that dropped seed. Or the birds might bring ticks in that they have on their their bodies, and those will drop off, and then you're a potential next victim, or your animals are. So these are things you want to think about when you're looking at your property. Wood piles, another one. Chipmunks love to
any little nook they can hide in.
Exactly. So, think about it. And then thinning out trees, we already talked about that. That will allow more sunlight in, drying things out. Keeping your lawn mowed, that's going to be a plus as well. Ground cover, you don't want it up against, areas that you're going to be walking through, because
Okay.
again, that's another great
So I'm
example
going through this
of a
mental
habitat.
inventory as you're telling me this. I'm like, oh, we got some work to do.
Yeah.
Especially that border between the forest area and the manicured lawn. I think we could do a little bit of work on, just to like have that more delineated
Yeah.
for the dog
And it
for
doesn't have
me.
to be expensive. I know I talked about rock. That could be expensive, but if you have trees down from any of the storms in winter, you could chop
Yeah,
or
we
chip them
did
up.
use some
and,
wood chips back there.
Yeah, put those there. But again, you want to make sure that it's not holding moisture and becoming a tick habitat either, because think about, a lot of people like to rake up their leaves and put them into the woods. You're creating another habitat because they can climb into that leaf litter, and that's very humid in there. It's protected, it's wet, it's moist, which they need. And all ticks, their demise will be drying out.
Yes, and that's your last thing. That's your
is.
big last message here, is
Yep.
that we want to dry out the area.
Exactly. Because when we've had a drought and we've had very, very hot and dry days, some ticks are going to move down into that, that layer, the leaf litter, or to the soil. But any that are extreme exposure to sun, they're going to die.
Okay.
So, the population will get hit a little bit, but again, we are not going to be without ticks, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So we just got to be wise.
So we're coming to an end here, but we talked about preventing within our yards and drying out, and how they're carried on the different rodents. So this has been really interesting for me. And also, just as humans, we just want to remind people about prevention, that they should use some insect repellent. I don't want to say insect because they're not insects. Yeah, I learned. I'm listening. To remove ticks promptly, to do a tick check when you get inside.
Yep.
That's really important. That's something we do in our house. That is one thing I'm religious about. Apply pesticides to grasses. It's optional. Synthetic pesticide, as you said. Reducing the tick habitat, so not giving those wood piles, at least not having them too close to the house, maybe. Or giving nooks and crannies to those rodents.
Exactly.
I really learned a lot. This is like amazing. And then hiking, just as an example, just stay in the middle of the trails, not on the edges where those grasses are tending to grow.
Exactly.
So finally, you just have a little bit of information about testing facilities if people are
If
interested.
people are
should you get your
interested-
ticks tested?
You don't have to, but some people may want to, and there are 2 facilities, well, actually a few of them, but Tick Report, the university has partnered with Tick Report out of UMass Extension, and they have a lab there that you can send a tick to if you're concerned about any of these diseases that they may be carrying. And there is a fee for it. It's between $50 and $200 depending on what type of testing you want done.
Wow.
But they'll take the tick and they'll do what they need to do with it. There's
It's like
also
tick
the
DNA. We did our dog DNA.
Exactly. Yep. And then there's the Connecticut Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab also does tick testing.
Okay.
The tick check and the technology. So all of those do the actual tick testing facilities and do the pathogens. So for tick identification, if you don't feel comfortable with some of the tools that I have pointed out today on actually identifying them yourselves using the festoons and the scutum and the mouth parts, for example, you can take them and you can send them in. We have an insect identification center in Durham, and it's staffed by entomologists, and so they can identify the tick for you and give, they're not going to test the tick. They're only
just
going to
gonna
identify them, exactly. And also the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture has, the state entomologist has a lab up there as well, so you could send a tick to them as well.
So one other resource, Tick Free New Hampshire.
Tick Free New Hampshire, I can't praise them enough. They have a website that you can go to and you can get some of these tick supplies like a tick spoon. I didn't mention this, but this is an excellent tool for removing ticks. If you do get a tick on you, keep in mind again that the deer tick has a longer, thinner mouth part. The hypostome can actually penetrate in. As an adult, it's a little bit harder to get out. However, with something like this, it's got a notched edge here. So what you would do is if you had a tick on you, you would put that notch right underneath where the tick has adhered to you and just pop it off and it will fall into that cup. And also they have fact sheets. They've got a lot of the information we talked about today. They've got information on there to supplement what we've just been talking about.
So you've given us so much to think about and so much to look for in our own yards and to all remember to do your tick checks. So thank you so much, Rachel, for taking some time out of your day. This is high season for you, I'm sure, because
Yes, it is.
It's bright and beautiful out there.
Yep.
But thank you for joining us and teaching us about this important part of our environment. And I want to thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.